Okay, everyone, it's officially 8:29 and a half. My name is Ron. I'm an alcoholic. How you all doing? Welcome home. A couple quick announcements. Where is Jason at? Mr. Jason's in charge of our YouTube channel there with over 300,000 views. Let's let him know how. Everybody that clapped, see him afterwards and charge him $1. Anyway, this group's all about service, meeting before the meeting, meeting after meeting, hang out with us afterwards. We've got a lot of fun time. It's all inclusive, never exclusive. We have treatment center, institution commitments, very powerful. See us after the meeting. There's a lot of people that need a message of hope and recovery. We've purchased over 500 big books this last year, and we give them away for free thanks to your contributions, donations, and support. And with that continued support, we will continue to do what we do, carry the message to the sick and suffering. With that, we have the world's best chairperson. Let's give him a warm welcome. Let's welcome Brian up here.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is a 1-hour speaker meeting that meets every Saturday right here at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. That's 301 North Main Street in Doylestown, PA. The food and the fellowship for this group starts at 8 o'clock every week, and the speaker comes on at 8:30. So feel free to show up early, join us, enjoy the refreshments, the food that we put out, the coffee. There's a business meeting for this group that meets every Saturday, 7 p.m. to 7:30, so feel free to show up and come early and join us if you want to become a member of this group. The purpose of this group is to provide a consistent message of hope and recovery through God reliance and service to others through the practice and teachings of the 12 steps. We record all speakers so that others can benefit from their message of recovery. If you wish not to be recorded, simply ask. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The group would like to welcome everyone, especially newcomers. So if there's anyone that is new from out of town or that's at this meeting for the first time that would like to introduce themselves on a first name basis so we can welcome you. Go ahead. Yeah, start in front of you. Welcome. Yeah. Oh, welcome. James. Welcome. Sean, welcome. On this side, yeah.
Gracie, alcoholic.
Gracie, welcome. Yeah.
Maria, alcoholic.
Maria. We get everybody? All right, looks good. The Conscious Contact Speaker Group encourages sponsorship. Would anyone with a working knowledge of the 12 steps and that is willing to sponsor, please raise your hands. So there you go. We got a lot of people willing to sponsor. So if you are new, you're coming around, or if you're struggling, hang out with us after the meeting. We'd love to talk with you, get some numbers, get some meetings, get you into the solution a little bit. Are there any announcements from the floor for the good of AA? Nobody has anything? Okay, a couple quick announcements for this group. This group does have a sister group, and that is a big book study meeting that meets every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. That's just up the road at Salem UCC Church. It's 186 East Court Street in Doylestown. And the coffee for that meeting is on at 6:15. So again, feel free to show up early and join us, especially if you want to get involved with that group. We have meeting lists and big books on easy terms. Please see me or any home group member after the meeting. If you cannot afford a big book, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group will give you one at no charge. Anyone that is willing to make donations for the purchase of big books or CDs to help those who can't afford them can put their donations in that jar on the back table there that's marked big book and CD donations. All CDs are available free of charge. As Ron mentioned, we do have a YouTube channel, Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Doylestown. We post speakers from this group on there. We also post speakers from a step meeting we have in the room right next to here on Mondays at 6 o'clock. This group also has a Facebook page. It's a good resource to have. We post happenings for this group, upcoming speakers, any events we might have going on, as well as other groups in the area. We'll post their anniversaries, anything they got going on. So it's a good resource to have to stay tied in with happenings and AA throughout the area. And with that, I believe Mike is going to come up here. He's going to read our Just for Today prayer of recovery.
Hi, I'm Mike. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome home. Just for today, prayer of recovery. Just for today, I will be agreeable. I will look as well as I can, dress becomingly, talk low, act courteously, criticize not one bit, not find fault with anything, and not try to improve or regulate anybody except myself. And Scott's coming up to read the preamble, I believe.
All right, Scott, alcoholic. The A preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We're self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Now JJ is going to come up and read the 12 steps.
My name is JJ. I'm an alcoholic. These are the 12 steps of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. Now Brian's going to come up and introduce our speaker.
Okay, we have a 7 tradition. Every A group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. At this time, you see that the basket makes its way around. Of course, there's no dues or fees for AA membership, but we do have expenses. You know, your contributions help us cover the cost of rent and refreshments we put out, so we do appreciate it. There's absolutely no smoking on the church property. That's the church's policy. We have a good relationship with the church. We're very lucky to be able to use this beautiful facility to hold our meeting in every week, so just be considerate of that as you're coming and going from the meeting. Wait till you leave the premise. Please take a moment to silence all cell phones and limit movement during the meeting to avoid distractions. And now to introduce our speaker for tonight, a good friend of the Conscious Contact Speaker Group, on loan to us from the Common Solutions Group and visiting all the way from Maryland. Please help me welcome Chris H.
Good evening, group. My name is Chris. I'm an alcoholic. Grateful to be here this evening. I'm grateful to be sober. I am sober by the grace of God, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, active, strong sponsorship, and consistent service here, and that is why I get to stay here. Thank you, Ron, for inviting me up to share my experience, strength, and hope with you guys. This has been a wonderful experience thus far. You know, my wife and I took this opportunity to kind of make a little date weekend out of this coming up here. You know, we live about 3 hours south of here, central, like the center of Maryland between DC and Baltimore, and we happen to have a free night at a Marriott, and so we booked that. We have a son that's going to be 2 in a couple weeks, and we dropped him off at at her sister's house, and he's there with getting beat up by his older cousins, and you know, it's just nice. This is our first date weekend away from our son in a while, or really ever. We had a wedding away, but that didn't really count. It's just us, completely focused, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here and experience that. And if you're new, and you're why is this guy talking about hotel points and his child and his wife and all that? It's because I can assure you, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, this was not part of the plan, right? Like I just didn't want to go to prison. That's why I ended up here, right? I didn't know anything about credit or family or fatherhood or anything, right? I came here with a job. I got paid on a Thursday. By Monday, I had $20 to my name and an eighth tank of gas. And the great decision that needed to be made was, am I going to eat this week or am I going to get to work, right? That's what I walked in here with. And through coming to Alcoholics Anonymous and doing what you guys do, I now get free nights at the Marriott with a wife that I love and a kid that I get to take to my family's home to watch him and keep him safe. And I would not have I wouldn't have any of that without you guys. And so thank you guys for being here. And this group I've been to a lot of meetings all over the country, a couple abroad. Like, this is a great place to be on a Saturday night at 8:30. We got here at 7:30. We were going to kind of wander around a little bit, but I had to use the restrooms. I drank like half a gallon of water up here, and so we came in, and there was already people here. The coffee was ready. There was like refreshments out, donuts, pizzas came in, and you don't get that at every meeting. Like, that's a strong. There's strong sobriety that exists here. So if you're new, just get centered here, and you'll be okay, right? And but it makes sense, because as I was driving into town with my wife and I'm looking around, it was like bar, tavern, bar, and I'm like, if there's that many bars, there's got to be good recovery here. In a very general way, I'm gonna try my best to keep you guys engaged for the next however long, and but just know that the only thing that I'm really trying to share with you tonight is Alcoholics Anonymous works, right? That is my message. That is my experience. Alcoholics Anonymous works. I did not come here trying to improve my resume, and you guys have taught me a way of life that I would have just missed out on entirely. And so we'll get into it. I have sobriety dates January 2nd, 2011. I have a sponsor. He is aware that he sponsors me. His name's Brad. I talked to him this afternoon. He was coming home from a birthday party with his wife and 2 kids. And we caught up briefly, but I try to let him know what's going on. And anytime I do a speaking commitment, I really just want to touch base, so he knows I could say that he's still my sponsor, right? And I do have 2 home groups. I have Common Solution has become a home group recently, but we are that group is on Monday nights. I can walk to it from my house. I did not walk to it from my house for the first year and a half that I lived there. And the reason that I started going there is because I go to pick up a guy that's in a wheelchair 15 minutes past the meeting to then bring him back to the meeting to afterwards take him home and do that. So instead of just walking to my house and being at this meeting for an hour and coming home, I have to inconvenience myself through service, right? And that's what keeps me coming back, And so if you're new, definitely just submerge yourself in service, because it keeps you accountable. And that meeting has been great for my sobriety. I've been sober since 2011, right? 13 years, and they treat me like I'm a newcomer. There's a lot of good long-term sobriety in that room. And then my Thursday night meeting, we were a promises meeting, and that's the first meeting I went to in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the first meeting that I got in, or the first hand that I shook there was the guy Brad that eventually became my sponsor. But that church, on the property that church was built on when I was a kid, that it was a horse farm, so working horse farm. My parents did not believe in paying for after school care, and so they sent me there to work until they got off work and would come and get me. And so my entire childhood, I was on this property. And then around the time that I started drinking, partying, pulled away from any real life obligation I had to be a part of, that property got sold or donated or whatever, and they built this church, and it's now my home group in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that has been my home group the entire time I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I heard early on in these rooms, the coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. And so it's just kind of every week I have a reminder that I'm right where I'm supposed to be. And I grew up in a town called Burtonsville, Maryland, and that's Burtonsville is where that Thursday meeting is, and then I'm right over, and that's in Montgomery County. It's the most northeast corner of Montgomery County, Maryland. And then my Monday meeting is in Howard County, Maryland, which is where we live. And Burtonsville falls under the Washington, D.C. intergroup. The Baltimore intergroup falls under the Howard County one. So it's kind of like, it's right there, but it's a little bit different how they operate. And so it's just nice to get different exposure and just see how, different personalities. But anyway, I say all that to say that if you're new, just get involved, get a home group, stay centered, and your life will get good, right? And that's been my experience. So I grew up in Burtonsville, Maryland. I'm the middle of 7 kids. My parents, so my wife is also the middle of 7 kids, right? But they're Irish Catholic, and they're all just like, they're their kids. Like, I only have one full sibling. We're more like dysfunctional Episcopalians. You know what I mean? Like it was just like a lot of blended family, and and I didn't know any different growing up, right? My parents just did the best they could with what they had. I recognized that through the steps and everything, but like it was nuts in our house, but we were always fed, we were always clothed, we had everything we needed, and occasionally what we wanted, right? And they were hardworking, blue collar people. My father was a maintenance guy, my mother was a career secretary, and they just did what they had to do to make ends meet. And there was always alcohol in our house. I did not realize that not every house always had alcohol in it. I just assumed that if you were an adult, you drank alcohol. If you were a kid, you drank water, juice, occasionally soda, right? That was it. And I didn't realize that our house was different until they came out with recycling bins. And the first week that they had the recycling bins at the end of the driveways, I'm walking to the school bus and I see our recycling bins overflowing with Budweiser bottles and wine bottles, and the neighbors have like Coca-Cola Classic. I made a mental note. I was like, that's interesting, And the next time, and then I got invited to this kid on my soccer team's house after the soccer game, and his dad was drinking like chocolate milk at dinner with everybody else. And I asked him, I was like, you're an adult, why are you drinking milk at dinner? And that was the last time I was ever invited there. It was just like these little things I just noticed that they were slightly off with. And I really had a good childhood, right? There wasn't anything like we did fun things. We traveled a little bit, it was good. And one thing I will say, and something I related to early on in these rooms, is I was just wound tight, right? Like one of the first things I heard here that I related to is I just missed the handbook for living. I just felt like everybody else knew how to live life, and I just missed that class. And we would have these parties, and it's not just my immediate family, but it was also like we had a lot of cousins and uncles and aunts, and our house seemed to be the central house that hosted everyone. And we would have these blowout parties, and everybody would just kind of come through and give each other like hugs and a kiss, small talk, how's work, how's the family, whatever. Go to the deck, open the cooler, grab a beer, pour a glass of wine, grab another beer, pour another glass of wine, and I would just watch their shoulders drop. I'd watch them be able to breathe a little bit easier and laugh a little bit longer, and I was so attracted to that at such an early age, and I didn't know what exactly they were feeling, but I knew I wanted to experience it. And the first time I got to experience that how I wanted was on my 12th birthday, where one of my brothers, who's 10 years older than me, told me before the party started, we were setting up and everything, and he's like, when the party's done, whatever's left over, it's yours, right? And so the party started at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and at 8:30, I'm tugging on shirts. I'm like, aren't you guys tired? You should go home. Because I had no idea what enough was, but I knew I wanted enough, right? And I'm just watching the cooler just disappear with all the beer and everything, and I just wanted to make sure I had enough that night because I was ready to drink. And the party ended, whatever time, everybody left. My parents went to bed. My brother was like, have at it. And so it was, I raced to the cooler. I literally broke the hinges off of it, flipping it open. It was like one of those cheap, igloo coolers in the 90s. And I broke the cooler. I was so excited. And there was 6 tequisas left in the bottom of it. Now, tequisas were sold for a very short period of time because they were disgusting and nobody bought them. And it was probably the only reason they were even left in the bottom of the cooler, right? And next to the cooler, there was this bottle of wine that had been uncorked, but nothing had been, drinking out of it. And so my brother and I, we start chugging these tequisas, and we blast through them, and then we pick up the bottle of wine, and I'm just like slamming wine. And I know nothing about alcohol content at this point. I just know that the wine's a little bit sweeter and easier to go down. And very quickly, I'm fully feeling the effects produced by alcohol, right? And my brother, he's 10 years older than me. He was a tri-state champion wrestler. He was in the military at this point, and if there was anybody on the planet that I was truly terrified of, it was this man. And when he went to grab that bottle of wine from me, and I just kind of turned my shoulder and threw my forearm into him, and both of us looked at each other like, what just happened, right? What happened was alcohol did for me what I couldn't do for myself. Just leveled the playing field, removed the fear, right? I wasn't worried about what I was doing with my hands. I didn't care what I was wearing. I didn't care what I was saying. My perspective shifts so much that in my mind, he was lucky I wasn't going to beat him up. And it was the most freed I'd ever felt in my entire life up until that point. And I'm 12 years old, and I end up throwing up all over the place, like blacking out, passing out. He said I face planted at one point, I go to bed, I come to the next morning, I feel horrific. I feel absolutely horrible. And I come to and I just couldn't wait to do it again. It's like I just wanted to experience that feeling for forever, right? I didn't care what the consequences were. I didn't care what any of it was. I just wanted to feel that feeling that alcohol did for me. Now, I wasn't drinking socially with other 7th graders at that point, so things didn't like take off for a while, but when they did, I was ready. And I can experience it. Like, I have this bottle of water right here that they set up for me, and I might drink it tonight, I might not. We'll see how it goes. But one thing I can assure you is that if I drink this water, when this meeting ends, I'm not going to leave out of here and buy a case of water, or another case of water. I'm not going to ruin relationships. I'm not going to not show up for work or have my parents worried about me or get arrested because it's a bottle of water. Right? And it's just a beverage. And when a non-alcoholic experiences consequences through drinking, they can just stop drinking, right? Because it's a beverage. Or they can just have a drink, and that's it, right? For me, it's magic, right? Alcohol does for me truly what I cannot do for myself. And so things take off a little bit. I can't, really access alcohol as much as I'd like to or as often as I'd like to, but any opportunity I had, I drank. And things really started to take off this summer going into my senior year. That's when my peers were working. We started driving. It was just easier to get around and get into other extracurricular activities. And we found a few spots that would sell us. And, and there's also the, siblings would occasionally buy for us. And very quickly, I would just I tried to be a weekend warrior. That lasted like 2 times, and it just was like every single day. Like, that was my cycle. I would just get off work or get out of school and I would just drink as much as I could. I would do whatever else as much as I could. Like, I was just having fun, And most people don't experience that, right? They're like, it's 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, you're your senior year of high school. Like, you don't need to be drunk right now in class. And that was it, right? And I barely graduated high school, and that following, like a month after graduating in July, I went to a party, and it was a college party, and so I was like kind of anxious going into it. And then that immediate friend circle that I would like drive around to and go to these parties at, we would like take turns being a designated driver. And this particular week, I was supposed to be the designated driver, and it was a keg party. And so I decided what I would do is I would get there and I would just drink a 5th of whiskey as quickly as I could. And, by the end of the party, I'd be sober enough to drive. And so I did that. The party ended. I started driving home. I was speeding. I got pulled over. The officer pulled me out of the car, and I got my first DUI, right? I was 17 years old, and he was taking me through all the sobriety tests on the side of the road. And I was cooperative. I wasn't like rude or anything. I was answering his questions, trying to pass them the best of my ability. We go back to the station, and he has this like big thing on the table that like blow into. It wasn't a handheld on the side of the road on the road. I end up blowing a .23, and he just like looks at me, and he's like, I didn't know what that meant, right? He's just like, dude, this isn't good, I was like, well, am I like the Michael Jordan of DUIs, right? Like, I don't know, just said 23 on the screen, and he was like, he did not find it amusing. He just gave me this look. He was like, look, man, you're 17 years old, right? Like, I knew you'd been drinking, but had you been of age, I probably would have let you go. He's like, and this is going to present a serious issue in your life. You're just starting out, and you're able to consume this much alcohol and be coherent. Like, this is not okay. And he was genuinely concerned about my well-being, and I was just like, oh, dude, it was a weird night, right? Like, I don't know what to tell you. And it's not usually the case. And so I ended up getting that DUI. I called my mom, and she came and picked me up. And I walked through the door, and my dad looked at me, and he was just like, if you weren't speeding, you would have never had a DUI. The reality of that is, if I wasn't drinking and driving, I wouldn't have had a DUI. I just would have had a speeding ticket. But that was the perspective in our home. It's very much do what you're supposed to do. You can do what you want to do. And so we got through that. Right, that was the first big trouble I'd ever been in. They paid for the attorney, and I went and we sat down, and the attorney suggested I go to some alcohol education classes. And so we picked a place that was kind of convenient for my schedule or whatever. And there were 6 courses. And at the end of these 6 courses, you get a certificate to present to the judge. And they were trying to it wasn't like a scared straight or whatever, but they just went through the education process, the dangers of alcoholism, yada, yada, yada. And one of the weeks I remember specifically there was a class, and the room was like half this size, half this many people, but every single person there was there for a drinking or drug-related offense. And I remember the lady teaching the class was like, look around you, the majority of you will be back here. And I remember sitting back in my seat that week, looking around me and thinking to myself, like, the majority of you are idiots, you know? There's no way I'm going to be back here. So I ended up back there, you know, and it took a little while, right? It took about 5 years, but I just like, you know, I got through that class. I got the certificate. I ended up going and doing a tour of shock trauma in Baltimore. I had some community service. Like, mothers were mad at that point, so I sat in one of those classes, and you know, it was just like I did what I needed to do, and I got out of it because my parents paid for it, right? And they like made me go. They drove me there. That's why I got out of it. It was left up to me. I would probably still be dealing with that, and so fast forward a little bit. I ended up getting into a trade, and after working this trade for a little while, I got accepted into a 5-year apprenticeship program, and that's when my drinking really started to take a shift because I had work full time. I went to school 2 nights during the week, and I went all day on Saturday, right? And so like beer kind of just went out of the equation. It was just liquor, and also in that trade, and because I was previously on probation, the extracurriculars went out of the picture, and it was just alcohol, and the extracurriculars helped kind of maintain my alcohol. I didn't really think that the alcohol was the issue up until this point in my life. I thought it was the extracurriculars, but then once those were out of the equation and it was just alcohol, I mean, things started to get crazy, right? Like I could have had a reality show at that point in my life in my friend group if that was the thing. Like, it was just nuts. There was just fights all the time. There was just chaos all the time. Like, it was insane. But we were just drinking. I was just drinking liquor, no more beer because I didn't have time, right? And then I turned 21, and that's when things really changed because then I had no limits, and it was like that whole show up and do what I have to do, and I can do what I want to do, right? If I'm going to work and I'm going to school and I'm passing my classes and I'm keeping a job, nobody can say anything. Work hard, play hard. That was it. That was my motto, and I like to play hard, so I worked a lot. And very quickly, I became a bar fly, right? This was my routine. Especially on nights I didn't have class, I'd go to the bar, I'd shut it down. Bartender would yell last call, lights would come on, I'd order some drinks, you know, take them real quick. I'd look around, I'm like, what are we doing tonight? Everybody's like, we just did it, you know, go home. And I'd go home, I'd pass out, hopefully, right? There was a lot of nights I would just stare at the ceiling, head racing, just constant, you know, would not be quiet, head going nuts. But most of the time I had enough. I could pass out. My alarm would go off. I'd start work at 6 a.m., right? And so my alarm would go off like 4:45. I'd hit snooze up until the last minute. I'd get out of bed, like just some like cold sweats, right? Heart racing. I'd kind of stumble into the bathroom and turn the cold water on, and I would cup my hand under the sink, and I would just drink as much water as my body would physically let me, right? And this was every day. 21 years old, every single day. This was my morning routine. And I put the toothpaste on the toothbrush, and as soon as it hit my mouth, I knew it was a coin flip if I'd start dry heaving or not. And that was it. I didn't know what other people's morning routines looked like, right? Like, I didn't go to work and start taking a poll, like, anybody else dry heave today? You know, it was just, if you ask me, I was living exactly how I wanted to be living. I was doing exactly how I wanted to be doing, right? That was it. It was like Groundhog's Day. I was an ideas guy, right? I couldn't do anything. I just worked, school, drink. Occasionally, I'd get invited to a concert or a fishing trip, or I would go camping, but only if somebody else planned it and included me. And then it was a crapshoot if I would show up or not. You know, my friend group started to get smaller. I became more of a liability, right? And this was the cycle of life. And, you know, and especially as, like, I went through that for a couple of years. And, you know, I was like the guy that I always wanted to be like the happy-go-lucky, hit the dance move on beat, land the punchline on the joke, right? Like, just that's what I wanted to be when I went out. And occasionally I would hit that mark, you know. More times than not, I was just like strangely aggressive. You know, I'd be in the bar, I thought somebody would be looking at me or judging me or whatever, and I would just like jump in their face, you know, I'm like, what's going on? Like, just try to like poke the bear, start a fight, whatever. That was a lot of like a specific group of friends. That's kind of what we did. And then really what started to happen a lot was I would be like the emotional Chris, you know, like out of nowhere, I was just like snot crying, and nobody wants to be around a large human being snot crying in public, you know what I mean? And that is, and then really, like, there was more times than not, I would just hit the whole range of those emotions, you know, so my world got smaller, less people invited me out, you know, I became more of an ideas guy. You know, I just talked about everything I wanted to do. I wasn't doing anything except what I absolutely had to do. And I truly, like, I was at that point in my life, I was having fun. Like, I was just living in complete delusion. You know, there were mornings where I would still be drunk at work, you know, and I would just be like, I'm going to get a good rest. I'm going to get some good rest tonight. Maybe I'll eat some vegetables, you know, like just kind of take it easy. Like, I did have those thoughts, but they would flee, you know. As soon as I got some food in me and I started to feel a little bit better, then I just wanted to drink. And that was my cycle, you know. The event that brought me into Alcoholics Anonymous happened in October of 2010. And I closed the bar down like I normally do. And that night I just wanted to drive fast, right? I neglected my father's rule 5 years before that. Like, don't speed, you won't get a DUI, you know? And that night I wanted to drive fast for whatever reason. And I left the bar, and it's just like literally one turn. Like, it's a straight shot down like a main road, and then turn onto the road that I live on. And you just kind of climb up this hill, it levels off, there's a slight dip, you go straight, that's it. Right, and I'm like coming onto the road fast already. I'm redlining every single gear, screaming up this hill, hits the level off point, and I hit that dip, and the car gets a little shaky, and I hit the brakes, right? And evidently, the physics behind hitting the brakes at a high rate of speed is equivalent to hitting the brakes on ice. You know, I just lost complete control over the vehicle. I ended up smashing into a telephone pole, a tree, another telephone pole, and then a single-family home stopped me. You know, and it's like 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. I found out afterwards through the police report that the speedometer smacks the dash on the initial impact. I was doing 130 miles an hour. Right? I had nothing but a burn from the seatbelt. Car is disintegrated like in pieces, smoke's pouring out of the hood. I'm literally in this house, four houses away from the house that I grew up in. You know, and I'm sitting there trying to start the car, like I'm freaking out. You know, the neighbors are pouring out of their house. They like come and see what's going on. I'm like standing there looking all crazy, and they realize it's me. They're like, "Oh my God, Chris, are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm fine. Are you guys okay?" They're like, "We're fine. Don't worry. The police are on their way." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I kind of like mosey off into the bushes, and I take off running. You know what I mean? And I am in a full-on like 7-mile-an-hour sprint, and I hit a ditch that I did not know was there, and just did the old fly swatter into the earth. And I am laying there. I can see the front door at this point. I'm only 2 houses away, and the sirens are getting louder. My adrenaline's pumping, and I'm just like looking at that door. I'm like, just take a deep breath and get into the house, right? And so I take a deep breath. I get up. I get into the house. I take off my clothes. I brush my teeth. I hop into bed. You know, fight or flight, right? I was flying. I was gone. I left my wallet. I left my cell phone. I left like an entire range of witnesses that know me since childhood, you know. And so it wasn't very long. There was a instinctive knock at the front door where those fine people made it clear that if I did not come out, they were going to come in. And, you know, a common trait I've noticed amongst alcoholics is we tend to make decisions after they've been made for us, right? And but I'm like sitting there, and I decide I'm going to come out, you know, and see what they want. And so I go out there, I'm going through the sobriety, you know, whatever. They ask me all these questions, and I'm at this point, adrenaline's worn down. I am significantly more intoxicated than the first time I went through this experience. And my knee is blown out, right? And I'm just like, one of the officers takes pity on me, and she's just like, "Do you need an ambulance?" And I'm like, "Absolutely," because I know if I leave here in an ambulance, I'm not leaving here in a police car, right? So I left there in an ambulance with the police escort to a hospital where I acquired 19 charges that evening. And, you know, the officers followed them there. We went inside, or we were in a room, and my mom came to get me. And she was not allowed to see me until the police were done with their investigation. And so I can't even imagine what was going through her head, right? Nobody should have walked away from that accident, let alone run away from it. And, you know, and finally they get done. She comes in, I lock eyes with that woman, and nothing was said. She just gives me this look, right? This look that our literature describes as pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, you know? And I'd seen that look many times throughout my entire life, but that night it just cut me at my core. And we were sitting there for a second, and she's just shaking her head, right? Like, I can only imagine what's going through her head. Like, what's wrong with you? How could you do this? You know, just the whole gamut. She just says, "You ready to go?" And I was like, "Absolutely. You know, let's get out of here." So we go home. My dad greets us at the door on his way to work, and he just looks at me. You know, he's just like, "This is on you to clean up, right? Financially, it's on you. You got your one get out of jail free card." It's like, "We'll show up to court if it's convenient for our schedule, but this is all on you." And he walked out of the door, right? And so I end up getting an attorney from my other degenerate buddies that had a DUI attorney, you know, and it's much different from the ones my parents paid for, because this time I had to pay for it. And I called up, and they met with me that morning. We sit down and we go over, you know, I tell them the story. They're just like, yeah, whatever, where's your retainer? And but they had the guy had this stack of papers, right, of all the counseling services throughout the DC metropolitan area. And the very first one was the one that I went to 5 years prior, right? And that's that whole coincidence. It's God's way of remaining anonymous. It's the only piece of paper I took from all these counseling services, and I called the number, and the same woman that taught that class 5 years prior answered with a few minutes of talking to me. She's like, I had a feeling you'd be back here, you know? And I went by there that afternoon, and we sat down and discussed the set of circumstances at hand, and for the first time in my life, I was honest about my drinking, right? The questions that she was asking me, I was honest with the answers. I knew I was not going to finesse my way out of this set of circumstances. And she told me a few things at the end of that, right? She said, we're going to do a 6-month, right, 26-week intensive outpatient program, because I had, you know, on paper, my life was very full. I was working full time. I had this demanding schedule for this school. Then I could not miss more than 2 days a year. I'd be kicked out of it. Like, it was a very competitive program. And she fortunately recognized that. And she was just like, all right, we're going to do this intensive outpatient program. And I want you to go to at least 2 AA meetings a week, right? And if you go to more, that'll look better in court, but go to at least 2 meetings a week. She said, when you go to these meetings, you're quite literally going to meet every single walk of life you could ever possibly imagine meeting. So just pay attention to what you can relate to and don't worry about the rest. You know, and that really resonated with me. And she said, for these 6 months, she's like, don't drink. And I was like, lady, I'm never drinking again. And she kind of chuckled at me. She was just like, don't worry about it again. Just don't drink for these next 6 months. And I call up Washington, D.C.'s area intergroup, and I asked if there was an AA meeting in Burtonsville. And they said, yeah, there's one tonight. And I was like, it's been a long day. How about tomorrow? You know? And fortunately there was. And it was at that property, they told me, and it was the Cedar Ridge Community Church, right, in Burtonsville, Maryland, Thursday nights at 7:30 p.m. It was a promises meeting. And I walked in, the first hand that I shook was the guy, Brad, and he just said, welcome. And that's the guy that eventually became my sponsor, you know, but not that night. I went in, I couldn't tell you anything about that night or the next several nights, but what did happen is after a few weeks of coming and getting the slip sign, I ended up connecting with this guy in the parking lot beforehand. He had a nice truck, and he had, like, you know, similar, like, Fox Racing was like in popular attire at that point. He had like some Fox Racing stuff, and I like dirt bikes, and I was like, this guy seems cool. So we get to talking beforehand, and we connect. And he had similar circumstances. He just had his second DUI, right? But he had time in AA before, so he like understood the language and like kind of how things worked. And he left, he relapsed, whatever, and got this DUI. And he was trying to like rekindle his life, you know. And he had figured out that there's nothing to figure out, right? He's like, come in and do the work. And so we connected before the meeting just for a few minutes, right? Maybe a 5-minute conversation. We sit down, the meeting opens, the speaker spoke. It took a halftime. After the halftime, they opened it up for sharing. He shot his hand up, and for the first time in my life, I felt my feelings put into words, you know, and I just connected so much for him from what he was saying. And at the end of his share, he was like, I need to get a sponsor. I need to get some phone numbers. I need to get a home group. I need to start working some steps. I need to get some service. And for the entire rest of that meeting, all I thought about was how I don't really know what any of that means, but I probably need to do the same thing, you know. And so I asked that guy, Brad, if he could sponsor me, and he was like, yeah, absolutely. He was like, call me every day. How many days a week did you drink? I said, every day. He's like, great, go to a meeting every day. And I was like, I only have to do 2. He was like, yeah, if you put the same effort and energy into your recovery as you did your drinking, you have a great chance of staying sober. And that made sense, you know. And he was like, I want you to pick a home group, and at that home group, I want you to get service, right? And if you do these things, you know, we'll sit down once a week, and we'll go an hour before the meeting, and we'll go through the big book, page by page, line by line. We'll go through the steps. I was like, sounds great. I didn't do any of it, right? Like, I got linked up with this other guy. We just start going to a lot of meetings all over the place, you know. By this time, it's like late October, early November, and New Year's rolls around. And I was, you know, I knew enough about the Maryland judicial system. Like, I had a court date on January 9th, And I was like, I'm going to go out of town with a couple cousins while I still can leave the state without permission, you know? And so I went to the Outer Banks with my cousins, and I was sharing in meetings. I was like, I'm going out of town before, whatever my court date, just like relax and everything. Like I was like trying to like prep everybody, let them know, like I'm going to do this. And they're like, look up some meetings down there. I'm like, I'll be fine, right? I'm just going for a few nights and coming back. And I went down there, and I wasn't there for 5 hours, and I was drunk, right? I was drunk. My cousins were well aware of my circumstances. They were like encouraging me not to drink, and they were just like, dude, what are you doing? I thought we were just going to come like hang out, eat some good food, and relax or whatever. And I was drunk, because I had no defense against the first drink, right? And this couple of months of just going to a lot of meetings and not drinking, I started experiencing that physical sobriety. I started sleeping better, I started eating better, I started feeling better, but I wasn't treating the causes and conditions. I hadn't done anything to protect my sobriety except go to a lot of meetings. And I came back, I remember it was New Year's Eve. It was like 2 or 3 a.m. I was sitting on the deck looking up at the stars with like 2 fingers left in this bottle of bourbon. And I just felt so empty, so hollow, and so alone, right? That alcoholic loneliness that only a true alcoholic knows. And I just remember staring at this up in the sky, and the only thing going through my head was like, how did this happen, right? How did this happen? And when I came back, I picked up a 24-hour chip. I told my sponsor, I was like, hey man, I relapsed. He's like, hey man, in order to relapse, you have to recover from alcoholism. He was like, you're in a 12-step program and you aren't even willing to work the 12 steps. He's like, you just kind of been around AA, not really in AA. And he's like, how about you start following suggestions, And I heard him, right? And, I'm not saying that the legal system has to be a part of your story. I'm not saying that a relapse has to be a part of your story, but for me, I needed that attention, right? My wife's an outstanding member of Alcoholics Anonymous. She never got in any legal trouble. She never relapsed. She was a first nighter, right? She has an outstanding program. She helps a lot of people, and we live a good life. And in AA, our whole life is AA, right? But that was my story. I needed my ego to be pushed down as much as it could to just listen, show up and listen and do what you guys were doing. And so I very quickly, I was already in the routine of going to a lot of meetings, right, all over the place. And so with that routine, I just added service positions to all these different meetings, so that way I was accountable. I'd get there early, I'd stay late, right, much like what was going on here tonight. And, I was calling my sponsor constantly. I was telling him what was going on. He was taking time for us to get together, read through the book, and I did not process what was going on in this book, right? Like I went to school to learn how to weld. Like I hadn't read a book cover to cover. Like I couldn't even tell you the last time. Like I could count on one hand how many books I read cover to cover. When we started reading this book that was written in the 30s, I was just like, yep, checking the box, right? And things did not start clicking until I started taking other men through this process. But but he just took his time with me and just explained things the best he could to how I could understand it. But I just continued to stay. I just centered myself in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And so that goes on. Time goes on. I end up picking up these chips every month. I end up getting a year, right? I didn't date in my first year, and then I ended up I get the year. I start sponsoring guys, and AA is very much the center of my life. And then around 18 months, 2 years, I get into a relationship, right? And if anybody was on the outside looking in, they would be able to recognize it was a very toxic relationship. But for me, I was like, this girl's paying attention to me. We should date, right? And the delusion was I would go to an AA meeting and she would go to a bar, And so that went on for, I don't know, I think like 3 or 4 months. I moved in with her like 6 months. It was just like, it was terrible. Like she starts cheating on me and I'm like, I am a mess, right? And very quickly, like I am just out of my mind. The only meeting that I'm going to consistently is this H&I commitment, the hospitals and institution commitment on Friday nights in Southeast DC, where the bottom level was a homeless shelter and the top level was a 6-month inpatient rehab. And this is like in one of the worst neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. that I went to every single Friday. I had that commitment for 5 years, and I know that is the only reason I'm standing here speaking for you, right? Because I truly was out of my mind. I was just trying to self-will everything that I could. Like, this girl became my higher power. You know, I could not believe I'm like going around doing all this great stuff for the community and for myself and helping all these people, you know, like how could you cheat on me, right? And I'm just trying to self-will this situation to work. And, you know, and what ended up pulling me out of that was this guy that I was sponsoring. You know, I got home from work and I'm sitting on the deck or on the front porch, just chain smoking cigarettes, right? Staring down the street, just hoping that I would see her car, you know, just like crazy. And this guy that I was sponsoring called me, and I looked at his number and I was not going to answer. And I did not want to answer, but he had court the next day, and he had some very serious charges. Like, he was facing a lot of time in prison, and all I did was, I looked at the phone, I took a breath, and he went down with me to St. Elizabeth's every Friday night for the whole time up until that point. And when we opened the meeting, like you guys did tonight, we had a reading of acceptance, which is found on 417, and the stories in the back of the book is this paragraph of acceptance. And we read that every single week. And when I'm looking at the phone, I don't want to answer, but I do, and all I say is hello. And he just started talking to me about acceptance, right, for his court date the next day, the biggest thing that he's ever had to face in his entire life. And I put the phone on mute, and I just like break down crying, you know, and I pull myself together, and we talk about what we needed to talk about. I go inside, I pack my stuff, and I just leave, right? I got out of that situation, and, you know, unfortunately through pain comes growth. You know, and I was able to grow through that, right? And I sought God. I leaned into AA, and things kind of progressed, you know. And time went on, you know, still doing the deal. I ended up getting into another relationship that lasted like 3.5 years, and that truly, you know, there was nothing wrong with that relationship. And you know, we just fundamentally wanted different things out of life, but it was healthy enough, and we could communicate enough to realize that, like, we were going to, you know, this isn't going to work, right? Because every year her lease would come up, and we'd discuss moving in, and it just like our values didn't align. And so we end up parting ways, just no issues, right? And she's living on the West Coast doing what she wanted to do, and I stayed, you know, where we live and do all that. And, you know, and in that time, while I was dating her, I meet somebody, you know, and she's like kind of new in the program, but I like recognize her spirit. I'm like, she seems fun, you know, and you know, but I was very upfront that I was in a relationship. And then the next time we crossed paths, she was in a relationship. And then the third time we crossed paths, it was through God and service. We were both in a place where we were seeking growth, right? And it was like, truly, I had a conversation with God where I was like, in your time, you know, and she was having the same circumstances. And, you know, now she's my wife, right? And we got married, and it was just very organic and natural. And I say all that not just because she's here right now, but because it has truly been the most amazing thing that has happened throughout the course of my sobriety. You know, I can remember when I was a little over a year sober. I had a commitment at the Washington Area Intergroup on Saturday mornings. I went down there every Saturday with my sponsor for a little over a year. You know, and he was 10 years older than me, and he was dating this girl. And we were driving back one Saturday, he starts talking about, you know, he's going to propose to his girlfriend. And I'm like, I'm 24 at the time, right? And I'm just like, are you nuts? You know, you want to get married? And like, I'm just peppering him with questions, right? And then I was like, do you want to have kids? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, well, do you want to have like boy or girl? He was like, honestly, he's like, I hope I have girls. I hope I have a girl because I love my wife so much. The idea of like having a little version of her running around makes me happier than absolutely anything in this world. And I remember looking at him thinking to myself, there's no way I'm ever going to love anybody that much, you know? And, you know, and then fast forward, right? And here we are, right? I understand what he meant by that. When we found out we were pregnant, you know, a big part of me wanted it to be a girl, you know, because I've never loved anybody that much. And the thought of having a small version of my wife just made me happier than anything. We had a boy. It was probably better that way because he's just an animal, and it's good for us. But, you know, it's just been my whole life, you know, and it's so crazy because I really, for most of my life, I had this like mantra going through my head where I was like, I don't want to get married. I don't want to have kids. You know, I just want to be this like guy that just works hard and has nice stuff and, goes on these like crazy trips and does cool things, right? That was like my goal, and as a result of meeting my wife through this program and having the life that we do and putting God first and AA first, it's like I've never been happier. And when reflecting on that mantra going through my head my entire life, what I was telling myself is, you don't deserve any of those things. You don't deserve to be loved. You don't deserve to have kids. And I was trying to protect myself from being vulnerable, from ever experiencing that, and that was truly that was my stance, and it hasn't been, it has not been easy. Like, we've been faced with a lot in the time. We've been married since October of 2020, and we were planning our wedding, and it's going to be like 300 people, and the pandemic happened, everything shuts down. We already have deposits out for everything, and so it goes from 300 people to we have it in our backyard for 26 people, right? Our closest, basically our parents and our closest friends in AA, in our backyard, and it ended up being beautiful. Right, but that July, right, we got married in October. That July, we were both very much into riding dirt bikes, and like in the spring and summer and fall, and then the wintertime, we like snowboard and ski and like just travel around. Right, we stopped being ideas people. We got into action, and we had things like all these great activities that we do. But I had like a slight moment of panic when she was trying on her dress. I impulsively purchased a new dirt bike that I had no business buying, that was like way overpowered, more power than I needed. And I didn't take the time to like get the bike set up for my weight and riding ability, which is very important with the style of riding we were doing. And we go out of town. We had a great day riding. It's the end of the day, we're heading back to the truck. I'm like, everybody knows where you're at. They're like, yeah, we're good. And so I just like take off, right? I'm going through this field. I'm unfamiliar with this field. I just like go on like a fourth gear stand-up wheelie, like just flying. And I hit some ruts, and the bike just like kicks out sideways under me, and I just hit the earth, lights out. I have no recollection of the day. This is all that's been told to me. The only reason they didn't airlift me is because I was still conscious, right? And I can't imagine what was going through my fiance's head at that time, but it was. I know it was scary, right? And I just kept saying the same thing, like, man. And when I was told, I kept saying the same thing, like, I don't wreck often, but when I do, it counts. I think I have a concussion. I think my collarbone's broken. She said I was on repeat with that for 17 hours. I didn't even know who the president was, and this was during the Trump administration. Like, it was bad. And finally I come to, and I end up getting a surgery, and they put a plate in, a cadaver bone, and right, I think I'm healing, everything's going good, we're getting set up for this wedding, and I'd missed a lot of time for work, and so we go out of town for just a few days after our wedding for our honeymoon, and we just go to the beach for a couple nights. We come back. I had a follow-up appointment that Tuesday to like just get an x-ray and make sure everything's where it's supposed to be so I can start like strength training, and all the screws pulled out of my shoulder, right? 4 days into marriage, they tell me they got to cut me open again, and this time they got to take a chunk of my hip, like a cube out of my hip, to fill in the gap, and they need 2 plates. My wife's like, a week into marriage, they cut me open, and this is the first time in my life I've ever had to first time in sobriety that I had to deal with pain pills, and that was, I was terrified, right? And when they did the first surgery, everything felt better because stuff stopped moving around. But when they cut my hip open, I've never experienced pain like that in my life. And I dated a lot of loose women, you know what I mean? That was humor. She's lucky. Yeah. But it was the worst pain I'd ever experienced. Words can't even tell you how much pain that was that I was in from that, And when I came to after the surgery, and the nurse is looking at me like, we need to push you full of whatever that drug is. I don't remember what it was, some painkiller. And I looked at her and I was like, there's no way that I can put that, because I just heard too many horror stories of people like getting sober, having a surgery, and coming out addicted, right? And I was like, I cannot let that be me. And it was the worst pain I'd ever experienced, and we got through it. And fast forward, we end up buying this new home. We end up through crazy set of circumstances, we were able to remodel it before we moved into it. It was an older house, and so we go in, things are moving and grooving, right? We find out we're pregnant, and all these things start happening, Then my dad, he ended up having a stroke, pretty severe stroke, and he had a stroke years prior when I was still drinking. It was it wasn't minor, but it wasn't big. And he was, it was on his 55th birthday, and it was enough that it affected him for a little while, but he was still able to work, walk, do everything, And I remember when that happened and he was at the hospital, I went to visit him for 15 minutes, right? I went there, I saw him, and I left, and I drank, because I could not deal with it, right? And so this happened, and we knew we needed to show up for him, and we did, and he was in this rehab place, and then his insurance ran out, and our insurance wouldn't cover this facility, and our house was one level, and he lived in an old house that just wasn't safe for him. And so we moved him in, and he stayed with us. My wife's 7 months pregnant at this point, and he's living with us. We're taking care of him. My mom's staying, she's coming back and forth, and during the day when we're at work, and we end up having the baby. I stayed home a week from work, and then the Sunday before I went back to work, he had rehab and things like that at that point, and so somebody was coming to the house, and so he was really strong enough that he could do stairs, and so we set up bedroom on his first floor. We move him in. We're raising this baby. 2 weeks later, their house catches on fire, right? And they were okay, but it got destroyed, absolutely destroyed by it caught fire. Their fireplace was in the center of the house, and the fire department just had to cut everything open to make sure they got it. And so 2 weeks into this fresh baby, right, and my dad moves back in with us, and they ended up living with us for 6 months until they found an apartment through insurance. My mom stayed down the street at her brother's house because she just couldn't share the same bed with him during that time, and it was absolutely insane, and just so scary, so terrifying. And we were able to show up for him, and just take care of it. And now through the amends process, of that living amends with him, there's nothing between us, right? My dad, he did the best he could for us growing up, and I had some pretty good deep-rooted resentment towards him, but there was nothing between us, and he just, they're doing okay now. They ended up selling it. That house got rebuilt, and they sold it, and they downsized to a 55-plus condo 1.5 miles from us now, and they come over weekly, and he's still in, he should be in a wheelchair, really, but he uses a walker, because if he's in a wheelchair, he just wouldn't do anything, and he's got severe sawed-on dementia. And so some days are better than others, but all this could have happened regardless if I was sober or not, right? And so the fact that we're able to show up for them in a way that most other people can't, right? I didn't realize when I came here, you guys were train your feet to go to meetings, train your feet to call people. I didn't realize that stuff was really training me for when life hits. For when I need to show up in ways I don't know how to show up for, by having conversations with you people that have had to show up in hard, difficult times, right? And my dad comes over, they come over once a week at least for dinner, and they see our kid run around, and we have fun and everything, but he really doesn't. I don't know where his level of focus is, but one thing I know for sure is when they leave out of here, right? Last week they came over. They were walking out, and my dad just looked at me at the door as we were putting his jacket on, and he's just see you next week, And the fact that he recognizes that we're consistent in his life enough that he can recall that he's going to come here next week and have a meal is just something that I would have never experienced without you people, right? And my mom, we become a pillar for them and level of support that, it's just. I'm forever indebted to Alcoholics Anonymous because of it, right? My mom has always been just the backbone of the entire family. They kept everything going, and for her to come to me for advice or to vent or for anything, right? Financial questions and all that. It's just I learned how to balance a checkbook here. I learned how to do my laundry here. I learned how to show up and be an employer. I learned everything here, right? I truly grew up in Alcoholics Anonymous. You guys have taught me everything, and just to be something stable for her, for my family, I wouldn't trade for anything. And, it's when I really reflect on the journey that I've had and everything that's gone on, it's one thing I know for sure, and it starts here. It starts in the rooms. But if you take it and roll it into all of your affairs, right? If I do the hard stuff, my life gets easier, right? If I choose to do the easy stuff, my life gets harder. And that seems to be the case all the time, right? Like if it's more Chris, if it's more me, if it's more what I want, less God, things become a mess, very quickly. And the opposite of that is if it's more God, less me, if I live a life of service, I try to stay out of myself and help you guys, then I feel fuller and more free than I've ever experienced, that I wouldn't trade any of this. And again, if you're new, if you're coming back, if you're just trying to recommit, or wherever you are in your journey, just stay. Because Alcoholics Anonymous works, and I'm not quite out of time, but I'm not going to search for any more to say, because then I'll just start lying and trying to sound cool. So, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, guys. Thanks for letting me share.
Okay, incredible stuff. Again, my name's Brian. I'm still an alcoholic. A couple quick announcements and we'll wrap up the meeting here. Again, the food and the fellowship for this group starts every week at 8 o'clock, so feel free to show up early if you just want to hang out and enjoy, again, the refreshments we put out. If you do want to get involved in service with this group, we got a lot of moving parts. We're always looking for people to join up. As Ron alluded to before the meeting, members of this group have commitments to H&I kind of stuff. So if you are interested in doing something like that, as he said, we have a running one tomorrow night in Quakertown, Sunday nights in Quakertown. So if you'd be interested in doing anything like that, bring in a message to the sick and suffering, to the front lines. See me, see anybody, any home group member after the meeting. There's always a meeting after the meeting. Again, there'll be a whole group of us hanging out, breaking down the meeting. If you do want to help us out with some service work immediately after the meeting, we could always use help putting away the chairs there. What else did I forget to mention? We got our CCSG hoodies on display. If you want to grab some CCSG swag, you can see me, see any home group member after the meeting. It is customary for us to thank our speakers as they come here on their own time and expense. They come here to share a message with us, so we usually do form a line in the front and we thank our speakers personally. I want to thank everybody for helping out with this group tonight. I want to thank thank Jason again, our YouTube guy. Thank Dom for bringing the pizzas. Thank Miss Kay for taking care of the kitchen back there. Thanks to all our greeters, all our readers, and let's give one more round of applause to our speakers. And with that, if you do care to join us, we have a nice way of closing down the meeting. We're going to circle up. Okay, and if you do care to join us, we'll close the meeting down, as always, with a brief moment of silence for the still sick and suffering alcoholic inside and outside of these rooms, followed by our Lord's Prayer. Our Father,